about our program. So I'll do a quick welcome and introduction here at the start. We are then going to spend about 20 minutes talking about foresight, systems, and scenarios. We have a special guest from the US connecting today, Taylor Hanna, who is with the Party Center. I'm going to introduce Taylor in a minute. And then we're going to have about 10 minutes of Q&A, questions you may have for Taylor, or if you have questions for myself or Johan, or at the operational level, if you have questions for Delphine, we can also assist you in any way that you need. And so really looking forward to the session. So a little bit of background. I first learned about what's called the International Futures Model when I was doing my own master's in Foresight, learned how to use the IFS model. And the background to that story is that there is an academic in the US called Barry Hughes, and I've got Barry's book here. Johan will put a link to the website that spent really the last 30 years thinking about how one does quantitative foresight thinking. How do you think about the future using quantitative data? And so we know, of course, from this program that many of you are interested in foresight, but you're also interested in quantitative data, big data, data analytics, artificial intelligence, and how we bring these worlds of data and quantitative analysis in line with the world of foresight. Now, one of the best ways to do that I've found around the world is with the International Futures Model at the Party Center at the University of Denver. And so today we're fortunate to have a fellow from the center with us. Taylor Hanna is a research associate at the Frederick S. Party Center, the Center for International Futures, part of the University of Denver in Denver, Colorado. She uses the International Futures Model as an integrated assessment modeling tool to explore questions relating to the future of human and economic development globally, as well as the development of effects of shocks such as conflict, the COVID pandemic. And so it's a real privilege to have you with us, Taylor. I'm going to start by just inviting you, Taylor, to talk to us a bit about the work you do. Tell us about the history, the background, anything that you'd like to share about the work that you do. The floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. And yeah, it's great to I guess see everyone here. I will say I don't know much about this program, but it sounds really exciting, and it sounds like y'all have been doing some really cool things over the past however long, I'm not sure. My name is Taylor Hanna. I am a senior research associate with the Frederick S. Pardee Center for International Futures, and I've been with Pardee working with our main modeling tool, International Futures, which we also refer to as IFS or IFS, for about 6 years now. I do a lot of work, research work with clients, including work with various UN and UNDP offices, as well as other development organizations and government entities. And then as far as the model, I guess I will say, Marius, I'm not sure what the format of this is and kind of how you'd like to proceed. I'm absolutely happy to kind of talk about ifs or anything like that, or yeah, what is it might help me to understand a little bit what the format of this this session is.
So happy to speak to that. So really it's a free-flowing conversation between us about the very interesting work that you do. I would imagine that you're able to share a bit about the model, the way the model is built, and then we'll get into some of the work that you've done. I know that you've done some work with the UNDP, and that Jonathan and others have done some work recently along the lines of the impact of COVID, as well as on international relations. Maybe we can get into discussing some of those projects. But if we want to start by talking about the model, that would be great.
Sure, of course. So the International Futures Model, or IFS, is our kind of main tool that we use, especially for development analysis. It is an open source integrated assessment modeling platform, and it covers kind of dynamic relationships with kind of 12 core systems. And those are roughly health, demographics, education, infrastructure, economics, technology, agriculture, the environment, energy, international politics, government and government finance, and socio-political variables. So in a lot of ways, each one of those systems is kind of a submodel in itself. It says we cover 186 countries and do forecasts out to 2100. Often our work focuses on a slightly closer timeline for 2030, 2050, 2063, especially for African countries because that's relevant to the AU goals. But we really focus on country level and regional level forecasting and scenario analysis out quite a long ways. So that's as opposed to, say, modeling by business cycle, by quarter, so on. We're often looking 10 to 50 years out. The different models are all sort of interconnected and integrated. So the idea there is that a change in agriculture, for example, might impact a country's economy, its environment, the health of the population, and so on. And that integrated nature is really what helps us to explore scenario effects across systems. Through that, we take I believe now it's always increasing. I believe now it's over 5,000 historical data series, which we have a large team of graduate and undergraduate student research aides helping us to pull in, to clean, to vet, and to pull into the model. And then we use that to forecast hundreds of variables out to, whatever horizon we're looking at. IFS was developed a little over 40 years ago by, as Mary said, Professor Barry Hughes, who is the founder of the center, the creator of IFS. Unfortunately, he was not able to be here right now. He is on vacation in Greece. So, that's why I'm talking to you, but he is still involved with the center, involved with work on, constantly developing the model. That's one thing that it is constantly being updated, improved, and developed, often in conjunction with clients and partners. So, saying, okay, what areas of the model do we really want to build out or add next? So over the years, we've added some of these submodels and added variables that can really help us improve the type of work that we do. I'm not quite sure. I don't know that it makes sense really right now to get into the technical details of the model. Honestly, it's not something that I can speak too much into because it is kind of a complex program, and we've got, again, 4 decades plus of development under it. But we do have I believe it looks like Johanna is linked to the website where we have lots of documentation and information on anything getting into the, say, technical parts of the different submodels and different variables. So yeah, maybe I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
So Taylor, that's excellent and very interesting. Thank you for that background. I want to come to something that you mentioned in your introduction there, where you spoke about the fact that you use forecasts, but then you use them with a set of scenarios. Can you talk to us, so just by way of background, in the program, in the training that the delegates are receiving and that we're going through, we've spoken about the fact that forecasts are very often sort of linear projections of data series into a single future, and that scenarios are very different, that there are these uncertain futures, multiple alternative futures. How is it that you bring those two worlds together in the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you. And I will just quick to answer a question I see in the chat from Chantal before we get into that. Our economic model, it is a general equilibrium seeking model. So it doesn't automatically assume equilibrium immediately. And it also has kind of a, I'm sorry, what is the word I'm looking for? It's very early here. it seeks equilibrium. We use a Cobb-Douglas production model to forecast GDP, which includes capital, labor, and technology, which we represent through multi-factor productivity. And that MFP formulation is further broken down into contributions from 4 sort of sources of a lot of what we call sources of capital: human capital, social capital, physical and knowledge capital. And that those are all informed by things in the system, which I think will help lead us maybe into the answering your question. We also include some representation of financial flows between households, firms, and government via a social accounting matrix. So it's really kind of a combination type of an economic model. And that gets into a little bit what we were talking about with the scenarios. So the main sort of everything we do in IFS is a scenario analysis, even our kind of base level forecasts, because those forecasts are as maybe I hinted at with the MFP talk, are all informed by the integration and by other variables. So we don't have a bunch of kind of individual variables that are forecast in a vacuum based on whatever whatever formula we have. We have a ton of interlinked variables. So we can't just forecast, say, GDP. We need to know, okay, what is the population? What does the labor force look like? What does the physical capital and infrastructure look like? What is the education of the population? What's the kind of human capital there? What is the, say, even like spending on R&D? What's trade? How is trade informing technology transfers? So there are a ton of variables that go into any one forecast. So that base level forecast that we can pull is what we call a current path forecast. And that's kind of the baseline of all analysis that we do with this. And the current path is kind of what we like to think of as the most likely scenario. It's a business as usual type scenario, but what it's not is a linear extrapolation from past trends. It does kind of have this dynamic element where you understand, okay, well, the population, say, is aging, and there's a sort of a smaller working force now taking care of a larger dependent population. How is that going to affect the labor force and the GDP? We often forecast some level of kind of progress steadily based on what we've seen in the past. And so how does that affect the growth, and how does that affect growth rates? So that's kind of what we look at there. And then on top of that, most of the analysis we really do is scenario analysis. And that's where in IFS, we essentially have, in addition to all the variables, we have a lot of parameterization kind of levers that we can pull to change, to make an intervention, a change in one variable, and see how that plays out and how that affects the development in the long run, and compare it with another scenario. As an example, we might have a scenario, say, focused on a big policy push, improving education in terms of, and again, in education, we have several options. We could affect enrollment. We could affect, say, primary intake or survival, or transition from lower secondary to upper secondary. There are lots of different variables in the education model that we could pick. And then we have quality. And that's loosely kind of based on forecasts of I believe it's the PISE test. I'm not sure now. But also that feeds into education and productivity. It's also affected by, say, spending in education. So everything is driven by and drives other variables. Now, if we make a change to education, we can look then at how that one intervention, we can follow that through into the long run to say, okay, if we make this change in enrollment, what does that mean, 20 years from now for the general education of the population? Say the total ed years that the adult population has, primary completion rates of the adult population, so we can really look at how that education change affects the pool of education in the population as a whole. We can also look at how that is likely to affect or to have follow-on effects to, say, the economy, right? When we talked about the MFP formulation, human capital and knowledge capital, those are big parts of that MFP figure that is helping to drive growth. So how are we likely to see that play out in the GDP of the population from that education boost? We can also, in the more immediate term, look at trade-offs and say, okay, well, in this case, this is going to require, say, a lot more spending from the government. So what does that look like for other sectors? Now, we can also then, if we're doing something like that, can direct that a little bit and kind of try to protect some sectors so that our education funding isn't all coming, say, from health funding. Also, a lot of the way that the model kind of distributes that money to different sectors based on sort of prioritizations that are set in the model, but we can protect that to some extent. And then we can also look at, from, say, that one education change, how that might very slowly start to drive, drive changes in demographics. If a changing education, has slowly sort of indirect influences then on demographic decisions. So that's kind of one thing that we do a lot in IFS is take scenario analysis, where we look at, say, one scenario. Often we compare it with the current path. Another thing we can do, and that's kind of what we talked about with the way that we look at a lot of shocks, like conflict, like COVID, is we do a counterfactual analysis. So we go back in time, essentially, and we do what we call rebasing the model. And we say, okay, well, let's pull the model back a little bit to say for COVID, say 2019. And then in 2020, we can have one scenario where we largely let the model pretend that COVID didn't happen, using what we, essentially the model we had in late 2019, early 2020. And then on top of that, we can create a scenario that simulates that COVID shock mostly through the growth rates that did change, as well as some, health variables. I think government debt is also in that scenario. So that's kind of what we do. The nice thing also about IFS is it has a user interface. I will say it's not the sleekest user interface. We are an academic research organization, so it's not what Apple would make, but it is it's a really nice kind of way. You don't have to know the code essentially for IFS to use it. So we have a user interface and a scenario analysis interface where you can search for parameters. You can walk through and use those parameters and run the scenario in a fairly straightforward fashion. And I see we're pulling up this is the online version of IFS right now. IFS is, I will also say, it's open source, it's free to use and free to download. And then we also always have an online version where you can use it without having to download it on your machine, which can take up some space, and it also doesn't work with Macs. So that's a kind of great resource for learning more about the model and how it works.
So Taylor, I'm giving them just a visual taste there that, IFS does exist. We're not talking about an imaginary reality here. Very, very interesting the way you're using quantitative data, forecasting it, looking at different scenarios of how that might play out by intervening in the model. At a very, very practical level, I'm, having collaborated with Jonathan and others I know that you often will form a partnership for a project, understand what the organization is trying to do with the model, whether it's the UNDP trying to think about the impact of COVID, or whether it's the Atlantic Council trying to think about the impact of trade relations. How does that process typically work? If an individual somewhere in the UN, let's say it's in Bangladesh, and they're interested in child upliftment in Bangladesh, what would a project like that look like in a couple of minutes?
Yeah. So almost all the work I do is sort of work with partners and with clients. And a lot of times that involves, most of our connections are often through, at this point, through kind of, word of mouth, or seeing something and saying, oh, I'd like to do that for my office as well. The partner essentially contacts us and says, hey, this is what we're interested in. And then what we do is we kind of work together to find something that, find a way that we can maybe answer that question in a way that the model is well suited. I think that's an important kind of part of that, is understanding that IFS is certainly not the only analysis tool. It's not the only type of analysis out there. And so there are sometimes questions that maybe we are not the best fit for. Say, if you want to know what's going to happen next quarter, or if you want to, model just a really specific area, say you were to really focus only on agriculture, and aren't interested in kind of the integrated nature, the effects on human development, the economy, and so on. That's maybe something that's better suited for a different model. So we work with our partners to find out, okay, what is a good way to answer this question? What can we do? And what can we do given resources and time constraints, of course, as well, that they might have. And then we get started. Some of that means, some of our relationships are the kind of work is very straightforward. It's kind of, really just pulling levers in the model and saying, okay, we already have the formulations of this. It's already working really well. We're just going to kind of create some scenarios, see what that looks like. That does take some sort of vetting and analysis on our part. In any kind of model this big, we need to, before we take on any work, what we really have to do is dig in and ensure that everything is looking good for, say, that one country, or for, say, that one kind of area. And then we will kind of be able to use the model to pull out, say, insights like that. Sometimes we do model development. And so that's bringing in, either improving existing formulations. So we worked with UN Women over the past year to break out our poverty model and forecasts in order to forecast poverty by age and sex, which is not something we had been able to do before. So sometimes it's improving existing areas of the model. Sometimes it's adding variables. So right now we're working with funded by the EU and in partnership with the Economic Policy Research Center based out of Macquarie University in Kampala, to add an age of marriage variable into the model, which I think will improve our forecasts of fertility and of girls' education, but will also allow policymakers to answer new and different questions. So that's kind of what those types of relationships can look like, and often how they get started.
Very, very useful. Taylor, there were a number of questions in the chat. I'm going to quickly touch on a couple of those, and then I see our session is almost at an end. It's been absolutely interesting and fascinating. There was a question around, are the CGE models dynamic and stochastic, which I'm sure you have a view on. And then there was a question from Kat about, what do you do about data gaps, which I've answered in a preliminary way, but interested in your thoughts on those two.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So I guess I'll maybe answer this backwards. With data gaps, we often, for any one variable, we have sort of hole filling techniques that we will use. Some of that's, kind of interpolation. Some of that is kind of estimation based on, say, known relationships with other variables. And that could be, GDP per capita or other things that we have in the system. I actually recently worked on a project with UNDP Yemen, focused on the conflict in Yemen. And as I'm sure you can guess, anytime we're in a conflict zone, data can be very sparse. So a lot of what we did is saying, okay, well, we don't know, say, the infant mortality rate, but what we do know more about the demographics and the population. We know, or we have some estimations of how the agricultural supply has been affected. We know about poverty. We know about water and sanitation. And so we can use all of those to help us inform the forecasts that we have and the estimations, say, so we can kind of almost triangulate and figure out what infant mortality is likely to be. So that's another way we kind of use, you can use the model and data gaps. That's where we're really focusing on that type of indicator, but or that question. But we also in the model have general hole filling techniques for all of the variables that we have. And to be fair, we also will be pretty careful as far as what we're pulling in, and ensuring that if we're adding new variables, that there has to be some kind of adequate coverage, or we have to have some way of dealing with that we rely on if there is not. As far as the CGE models, I will be the first to admit I am not a modeler. And so I'm not exactly sure what's going on in the sort of inner workings of the IFS model. I do a lot of working with it, and being able to work with that and pull that into a client report that will be really useful. But I believe you have some links in the chat. I'll drop a few more just to make sure they're there. And I think these might be updated, I'm not sure. To various resources that you can dig into to learn more about any of the individual models. We have our full documentation. You can download the model if you like. You can jump into the code, or also even just look at kind of through our wiki, maybe a more user-friendly, say, introduction to some of the individual models, their pieces, the data that we use, as well as the publications and the reports that we write from that model.
So Taylor, that's very, very useful. Let me add one thought, which is that one of the reasons I love IFS and have grown fond of using it is precisely that point, that it is completely open. There's no black box. You can go in and see what Barry thought 25 years ago and what more recent academics and fellows have thought about what they're building. And so there is transparency there, which is great. Taylor, let me say thank you for a very interesting 30 minutes, a quick data dump, download of what it is that you do, very really stimulating and interesting, and I'm sure many colleagues will enjoy exploring and trying out working with IFS. Let me wish you well for the next project, and say please say hi to Jonathan, and congratulations on his newest edition. I know he's had a little baby girl, which is wonderful. So thank you for being with us. You're on the UNGP program. Colleagues, just to talk quickly about what we are doing in the next week. We have our next theory session coming up Monday, the 23rd. It is a 2-hour session. It is going to be a full recap of Module 2. So if you have unanswered questions, any explanation that you need on Foresight methods and Foresight design, we are also going to hear from Delphine and the ITCLO team on their Foresight toolkit and what it is that they've done with Foresight in the ILO. And we're going to explore some other experiment examples of Foresight that is being done in the UN and elsewhere, and what we can learn from those. And then, of course, our learning group again on Thursday next week. So with that, thanks for a great session. And Taylor, thank you for taking the time. Lovely having you, and look forward to seeing you in Denver sometime soon. All the best.
Yeah,
thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much. It was so great to get to talk to y'all. Thanks.